Hi, welcome to another episode of Bass Tales. Thank you for listening and coming back and listening over and over again. For anyone that's a fan out there, really appreciate it. And today we have an interesting story. This is something that explains, I'm a little biased because I live here, that the southeast part of Massachusetts might be the best largemouth bass fishing area of the whole country. Now, don't think I'm crazy. You got to listen to this whole podcast so I can explain it, because I know you guys down south and like Texas and Florida are like, what is this guy talking about, this stupid Yankee? But listen to the stories, and at the end, you might want to take a trip up here and actually try some fishing, because it's a great area for largemouth bass, and we'll get into that in just a minute. I just want to go over some news real quick that happened. There's some interesting stories. This teen from Ohio, Sam Sparato, I don't know if I'm saying his name right. I hope I am. But he caught maybe the state record northern pike in Mentor lagoons. He brought it in. It was 45 inches long. He never weighed it. The record is 43 inches and a little over 22 pounds. He might have just released, because he didn't want to hurt the fish, the state record northern pike, which is pretty cool. And he got some pictures with the fish, and some people gathered together, which is great of these people, and they actually got a taxidermist to paint a replica for him. I guess the taxidermist did it for no charge on the paint job, which was nice, and people gathered up some money and bought a replica for this kid that looks just like the fish he released. And it's a neat story. It's cool how people came together after hearing the story to give this kid that type of gift. So I really thought that was a good story to talk about. And here's another one, a little scarier of a story about Wes Logan. He's an Alabama professional fisherman that fishes on the Elite Series, fishing a tournament on Lake Champlain recently. And his bass boat, he was going over 50 miles per hour and hit a giant wave, and somehow the boat spun out. He thinks he might have hit something, and he went flying across to the other side of the boat and banged up his head pretty bad and broke some bones, I think some ribs. Luckily, that was the worst of it. He ended up calling back to the dock to tell them, whoever the tournament director is or whatever, he got some help. They took him by ambulance to a local hospital, and the medical staff did a really good job patching him up with I think he had some stitches on his face. He's told him how important it was for him to get back on the water, because he wanted to qualify for the Bassmaster Classic, and he was right on that borderline, I guess. I don't know, really, I'm not a tournament fisherman. I used to watch the Bassmasters back in the day. I don't really pay too much attention to it now, but he needed to get back on that water so he had a chance to making it to the Classic. So the medical staff got him back together, I guess back at the dock. His boat was put back together by his Skeeter and Yamaha team. I guess took care of his boat, maybe got him another boat, but he got back on the water, and he ended up doing a pretty decent day. He did a 5-day limit with 16 pounds, and he ended up making the cut, I believe, for the Bassmaster Classic. So hopefully he does good at the Classic, and hopefully health-wise those ribs heal up, and he's feeling better really soon. So let's get into our main story today. Why I believe that the southeast part of Massachusetts might be the best largemouth bass fishing area in maybe the entire world. And like I said before, you guys might think I'm crazy, but I think you guys will actually appreciate, from being up north here, how well the largemouth bass fishing is in this area. Let's get to it. Really, largemouth bass aren't native to Massachusetts or even the New England area. I think they might have been in Lake Champlain that we just talked about with that bass fishing tournament, or maybe it was just smallmouth, not even largemouth. So the story starts how they got to Massachusetts was in 1850. Samuel Tisdale was a wealthy merchant from Wareham, Massachusetts, and an angler, and he hatched a plan up to introduce bass, black bass as they known at the time, to his home waters, and took 27 black bass from Saratoga Lake in New York. and put them in a pond called Flax Pond right by his, or actually Flax Lake right by his house in Wareham, Mass. It is now, I had to look it up, do some research here, but it's actually, so if you ever want to fish it, it's called Union Pond. It's just a small 25-acre pond, and it's right off a main area with some stores in Wareham. And you would have to park in like a commercial parking lot, and basically there is some access, I guess, there, because it ain't really an easy pond to get to. There's no boat ramp or anything like that, and still has largemouth bass in it to this day. He sent someone that worked for him out to New York to get these 27 bass, and they brought him back by rail on a train, and he put them in there. And he started doing this during the next 2 years. He arranged 200 more bass to other lakes in Plymouth County, and he kept the secret for 5 years to allow the bass time to settle in their new homes. They did well, that's for sure. He also arranged throughout eastern Mass and other parts of New England states, including Rhode Island and Connecticut and New Hampshire, send some of these fish to, so they can enjoy fishing for black bass as he did. In 1940s, game wardens urged anglers to fish for bass. Back then, trout was the main game fish, but bass kind of was starting to take over because people preferred how bass were a little easier to catch. They put up a little better fight than trout. And about that time, this is when bass fishing was really starting to take off and pass trout fishing. So Mass game wardens wanted to kind of push the new hot fish of the time and started pushing more bass fishing on people. And in 1952, Mass Fish and Game started to bring largemouth bass to several little ponds that were basically just small panfish ponds. It was a reacclimation project, as they called it, and started stocking it with largemouth bass. So that's kind of how largemouth bass got into the state of Massachusetts and the New England area. Now let's get into some of the reasons why I think this might be the best largemouth bass fishing area. So in 1975, Walter Balonis of Carver, Massachusetts, caught an impressive 15-pound, 8-ounce largemouth bass while ice fishing Sampson's Pond in Carver, Massachusetts. He caught it through the ice fishing, not even during like spring or anything. It was through the ice fishing with a tip up, which is like a little flag rod. I don't know. I've ice fished before, but I never used a tip up. It's like a little thing that flips up a flag when you get a fish on. And for some reason, he made a bigger hole. He had a feeling he needed a bigger hole that day with his auger, and made a slightly bigger hole, which was good because he probably wouldn't have been able to get that fish through the hole being that size. And it was caught on a large shiner. And he pulled it through the ice and was amazed by the size, went down, got it officially weighed, and became the new state record. This is where it's so impressive. A northern strain largemouth bass is different than a Florida strain, which you see down in Florida, in Texas, California. They grow slower. They can withstand the cold, where a Florida bass could not survive in the cold. They live about the same amount of years, 16 years. So to see a bass in northern waters reach 15 pounds, 8 ounces is pretty impressive because of their growth rate in the area it's in, having 4 seasons, having ice over it, having a smaller time to actually eat and grow. That is one of the reasons. And I'm going to get into this. Ain't the only largemouth bass that was caught over the years. And there's a great podcast that was done about this whole fish being caught that I really enjoyed. And I listen to a lot of their podcasts. It's called the Big Bass Podcast, and it's done by Ken Duke and Terry Battisti. Ken Duke is a editor and writer for Bassmaster magazine and some other stuff over the years, and very knowledgeable on the historics of bass fishing. The episode's called Miracle on Ice. So if you want to listen to more of the story about Walter Balonis and his catch, it's funny because one of the things is it says it was caught in Sampson's Pond in Carver, Massachusetts, and us locals pretty much all know that it wasn't caught there. Maybe there is a chance it was, but everyone says it wasn't caught there. There's people said it was caught in Dunham's Pond, which is north of Sampson's Pond, which could have happened. I don't believe it was there. Some people say it was just one of the bog ponds. We got cranberry bogs here, and maybe it was caught in one of those. I also don't believe it was there. And many, including myself, think it was caught in Agawam Mill Pond in Wareham, Mass., which is the town next to Carver. And we just have a feeling, a lot of us, that's where it was caught. Walter did tell some people, I believe, where it was really caught, and it spread more word of mouth over the years. He passed away at a certain time. He's not around anymore to talk to about it. So this is also some records that were caught, and you don't see these type of bass in northern states getting taken as much as these happen. So besides Walter Balonis here, we had some other amazing records taken from this area. So we had a 13-pound in 1976 taken, 12.1 in 63, an 11.4 in 93, an 11.2 in 80, a 10.15 in 1970, a 10.8 in 2006, a 10.8 in 1985, a 10.5 in 1963, a 10.2 in 1985, another 10.2 in 1969, and then there were also 4 10s listed in 1900, it looked like 1989, 2002, 1964, and 1970. A lot were taken in the 70s, 80s, but there are some that were taken later in the 2000s as well. So every decade there is these 10-pound plus fish coming out of this area of Massachusetts. Some of them weren't in the southeast Cape Cod area, but over 50% of them were. And one recently that was actually more western Mass, Gardner, Mass. Supposedly in 2013, a 14.2 pound largemouth was taken, and it was released, and it was measured at 28 inches, which is the same length of Walter Balonis' 15.8, and they got a girth of 30.25 inch on it. I couldn't find the girth on Walter Balonis's, but the length seems to match up for that size of fish. And the angler got a picture with it. There is controversy because a lot of people look at the picture. It does not look like a 14-pound bass. It looks like a pretty decent size, but a lot of people believe it wasn't that big. But it's good to think maybe that was taken up here in Massachusetts, because there is still a chance, I think, bigger than 10-pound bass to be taken in this area, and it happens quite often, which is kind of surprising, more than you would think in the northern states. There are people that I read on internet chat rooms and threads, and you have people that say that they have three mounts of 10 plus largemouth that they never weighed in. Multiple people that talk about themselves or friends catching something between 7 to 11-pound bass. So this is stuff that's more recent that doesn't get always shown. And if you go on the Massachusetts Fish and Game website, you can see some of these more recent catches. There's a ton of 25-inch largemouth that are taken, which are great size largemouth. Those are probably in like that 8 to 9-pound range that are released, because if you release it, they do it by inches, not weights. If you keep the fish, then they go by weight. And I'm going to get into one more story before I go into details why I believe that southeast Massachusetts here is the best fishing area for largemouth. It's not as much about the large bass, but it's a good story that explains how good the fishing is here in the southeast of Massachusetts. And he's also an inventor, and his name is Bill Plummer, and he's from Westborough, Massachusetts, and he was an angler. In his regular job, he was a flight instructor. And what happened is his daughter, that was 5 years old at the time, had got a little toy frog from a dentist visit in 1957. And being creative, Plummer thought it would look like a good fishing lure to use for catching bass. So when he went home, he inserted a hook in it and immediately started catching bass with it. He was so impressed with how effective it was, he contacted a manufacturer in Japan and had hundreds made and shipped to him. Before work each day, going to the Westboro airport, at between 3 and 5 a.m., he would assemble them by installing the hooks with the little lead guard. His sales campaign resulted in Harrison and Hodge Industries manufacturing to start making his lure and marketing it. And then he started coming up with some other lures as well, highly effective lures like the Plummer Water Demon, which was like a bottom lure, the Plummer Banshee, which was like a spinning bait type lure. But it was his Super Frog lure, the original one he came up with, that made him independently wealthy and a millionaire, and allowed him to fish almost every day from the first day of ice out to the day ice came in. He loved fishing so much, he would be out there 6 to 7 days a week doing this. He didn't care about bass tournaments, expensive boats and stuff. He just enjoyed fishing alone in the surrealness of it. All he had was a little 12-foot aluminum boat that was a car top boat, and he had a little rubber floor that he installed to keep things quiet. And he had a little 3-horsepower Evinrude motor that he barely used, I guess, and he liked to just row the boat around. He preferred this setup because he could get into those remote ponds that he favored and believed that they were the better fishing ponds. And he kept records of all his fishes that he caught over the years. He caught well over 1,000 bass over 5 pounds and hundreds in the 6 to 7 range. Nothing in the double digits like we talked about earlier, but you can see the quality of the fish in the area of seeing thousands of bass caught over the years at 5 pounds and hundreds in the 6 to 7 range. In 2006, he was inducted into the National Freshwater Hall of Fame as a legendary angler. He died a year later in his hometown of Marlborough, Mass. And Harris Hodge, which is part of Panther Martin, I think this may be the same company, still make it today. It's called the Superior Frog. So if you look up a picture of it, you'll probably recognize it if you've been fishing for a few years. It's the original rubber frog for fishing. So let's get into why I believe that this area is the best largemouth fishing. So number one would be weather is getting more mild, and it's only getting warmer in this area. Back in the day, the ponds would freeze up hard enough to go ice fishing, like Walter Ballonis. But in these past few years, since probably like the mid 2000s, it's definitely gotten warmer in this climate area. The water doesn't even freeze up, so the fish, they have a little bit more time to put some more weight on because the water's staying warmer longer. Also, this part, the southeast and Cape Cod, so South Shore, Cape Cod area, Massachusetts, stays warmer than the rest of the state. So the longer growing season, because of the milder weather around here, can make bass grow more and produce more bass. So number two would be there is a lot less fishing pressure. We all know fishing pressure can turn a great fishing area into not such a great fishing area because you get too many out there putting pressure on these fish. They learn these lures. They hear these outboards. The fish do learn. You get into a point where so much fishing pressure, it could also, damage the growth of the fish and make it harder to catch. And one of the reasons there's not much fishing pressure in this area is abundance of the fishermen prefers the saltwater fishing. It's just more popular around here. And there is great saltwater fishing. So when bass season really heats up in the later spring into the early fall, where typically when you're not near the saltwater, that's one of the best times around here for largemouth bass fishing. A lot of people are out hitting the Cape Cod Canal or out on the beaches or out in boats in Cape Cod Bay, and they're fishing for striped bass, and some are out there fishing for bluefin tuna. You got the competition of great saltwater fishing that takes fishermen away from the freshwater. And a lot of times, by the time the striper season is over, they start stocking the ponds with trout. So a lot of the guys that do the saltwater fishing don't even go for freshwater bass. They'll just go right into trout fishing season. It's just an easier fish to catch. A lot of them that saltwater fish like to eat the fish, and trout are definitely way better eating than bass. That would be the number 2, would be is less pressure around here. Number 3 will be kind of right off that trout. We have many ponds that are stocked with rainbow and brown trout, and those ponds that are actually stocked with trout usually produce good bass fishing ponds, because the brown trout will eat the baby smaller bass, and the bigger ones that grow that the brown trout can't get, they eat the rainbow trout, and they'll grow to big sizes, as you've seen in the past out in California with those giant 20-pound bass. So having that trout will make the bass bigger and also keep the pressure off the bass for the fishing as well. So they go hand in hand together. Okay, so let's move on to number 4. There is many ponds in the southeast part of Massachusetts. You got 890 ponds on Cape Cod and over 450 ponds in just the town of Plymouth alone. So there's well over 1,000 ponds, and many are hard to get to. There are some that have boat ramps and are more well known, but if you're really going out and you want to catch an abundance of bass, or maybe that 1 or 2 big ones that are hiding out there, a lot of these are the smaller ponds that you're going to have to go down a dirt road or maybe even hike through the woods and fish from the shore. But that will give you an advantage over this. Definitely an opportunity to catch some bigger and more plentiful fish in these areas that aren't hit as much as other areas. So number 5 will be river heron. These saltwater fish, the river heron, when they spawn in the spring, they usually spawn around April. And there's 2 types of river heron. There's a blueback and there's also alewives. And they'll run up from the ocean and spawn into these freshwater ponds. So they follow these brooks and rivers up, and they will spawn, have their babies, and then leave again back to the ocean. So these bigger bass can feed on these river heron when they first get up to these ponds and get a meal out of that. And then when the babies are born, the little fry, they will feed on those as well. So I was fishing the other day, and I looking down in one of these ponds, and there's heron everywhere. It's like clouds of heron, these babies. So the fish have an abundance of those to eat and fatten up these fish and give them a good environment. It's a known fact that these saltwater fish actually are a little better for growing the bass than, say, even freshwater perch, stuff like that, sunfish. And supposedly bass prefer these heron over other fish like sunfish and shad because they're a little slender, easier to eat. Over the years, probably in the past 50 years, the state, and I don't know if the federal government, but I know the state government and local governments have been involved in repairing a lot of these runways that were destroyed for these river heron to keep that population going, because the river heron is very important to the saltwater fish for striped bass and other type of fish. They now installed a lot of fish ladders and been up on repairs on that. The heron population has definitely increased in the last 50 years, because back in the day they would dam up areas and they didn't have the environmental knowledge to know that would damage a fish population. Yeah, when I was up there fishing the other day, to get back to that story, I see all these heron, so you could see them every once in a while. They're little itty bitty guys still. They're probably 2 to 3 inches long, and they are jumping out of the water, and you can see it when the school starts jumping. There's a predator fish around. So I actually took a small lure and throw it right where they're jumping. And I hooked up on a decent sized smallmouth, actually. I know we're talking about largemouth, but this pond had both. So you can see with these little fish, they really go after them. And so they're in the waterways until I think they leave maybe like the mid-fall, and they'll go back. And then it's just a rotation again of next spring you'll have the fish come back up and have the babies, and it'll be a good food source for these largemouth bass. So really, that's what it comes down to. I don't think I'm that crazy to think. I'm a little biased because I live in this area, but I've fished other areas in the northeast area, and I have had the best luck. It is my home waters here, but I fished a lot when I was younger up the New Hampshire area, and the bass are bigger up here. I know that, and I believe they're more plentiful too, and they seem slightly easier to catch than definitely ponds that are overfished, or not overfished, but just have a lot of anglers at it. There are ponds like that in this area that, the ones that have boat ramps, easy access, shore fishing. So there's so many ponds, being over 1,000 ponds in this area. There are plenty that you can go out there and explore, and those hard to get to ones could be some of the best ones to try out. All in all, I think if you want to find some of the biggest northern strain bass, you can come to this area, and I can say that you catch plenty of 3 to 4 pounders, but I hear about stuff taking 7 to 9 all the time, and once in a while you hear about the double digits. So there are good sized bass, and also like the story about Bill Plummer that kept those records, there are plentiful bass too. So there's a lot of decent sized bass that are plentiful. So you can come up here and catch multiple 3 to 5 pounders, but there's also the chance for that record northern bass, and the state of Massachusetts still has the biggest northern bass that has been caught. I think just those reasons alone, it's a great spot if you're a largemouth bass fisherman to try someday. You can come up here and give good old South Shore Massachusetts a try, and I don't believe you'll be disappointed. Come up for the tourist stuff. Check out Cape Cod, Boston, Plymouth. There's a lot of historic stuff here, so if you ever look into a place to travel, you might be worth coming here and checking it out. That's my story of the Southeast largemouth bass fishing here and why I think it's so great. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something, and hope now you don't think I'm too crazy for what I said earlier about maybe being the best place in the country for largemouth bass fishing, which does sound a little silly being up north. I hope you liked the show. Send some emails into basstalespodcast@gmail.com. Let me know of some other stories you guys might want to listen to. Give us a share if you can, and some good reviews and ratings if you can on some of these podcast platforms. Really appreciate that. And get out there, get some fishing in, enjoy this end of the summer, early fall weather, and go out there and catch some lunkers. Have a great day. Thanks for listening.